So, welcome to Youth Rugby Discussion. This is a podcast focusing on youth rugby union, as the name implies. And we're focusing mostly in the US, New England, but that's because where we are. And what we are is a collection of coaches, current and past, administrators, parents, basically folks that are involved in youth rugby. Lastly, I just want to make it very clear that though some of us may sit on different boards, we do not speak for any of those boards or any of those entities unless somebody decides to bring up news of some sort or does want to speak to it. But for the most part, we don't speak for anybody. It's just basically a group of interested folks discussing rugby, youth rugby, around a table in an easy way to communicate with one another. So please join us for this discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about resources. We're going to talk about where do you go to find, and we'll talk about the many different aspects of what it is that maybe you're looking for. So just in general, the resources. So again, my name is Daniel Mejia, and just to put voices to a name or name to a voice, folks, you guys want to go off the top and just introduce yourselves so everybody can hear your voice?
Yes, I'm Coach Allen. I coach with the Rentham Barbarians.
You've heard me. I'm Daniel. Jeff.
Jeff Karras, state-based organization, Rhode Island, the Fighting Go Hogs.
This is Kate McCabe, and I coach Belmont High School girls rugby.
And Shaggy, you with us? You're on mute.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. Hey guys, this is Pete Finneran, Shaggy, coach at South Shore Sharks Youth Rugby.
And I am Chris, rugby dad. Presently, I have kids that are playing in youth rugby at a few different levels, and for the Sharks and Wolfhounds mostly.
And I'm Skylar, high school rugby player for the Boston Irish Wolfhounds and the Rhinos.
Fantastic. So that's who we've got here today joining us. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Resources. Why do we need them? Where do we turn to? What's out there? Anybody wanna get us going?
Well, I'll start, Daniel, with just a few because I had some thoughts on this. And one, I'm really looking forward to this as a way to use this podcast and this forum. Well, I'm looking forward to learning from other folks. It's a really good way for us to exchange information, and while we get to record it, we can share it with with anyone else who wants to listen. And the other idea that I had is like how the world has changed, right? When I first became a coach, and it was about 2003 or something like that. When I first became a coach, I said, "How am I going to do this? Where's the directions for this coaching?" And I didn't know what to do or how to do it at that time. And the world has changed, and we have a litany of resources now to help us go on. And I'm so happy that we have so many places for us to go for information. But in the meantime, we also have each other and some ideas. Ideas we can bounce some ideas and resources we're using with each other. And one note, I'd say I would kick it off with books because that's where I went in 2002 when I first became a coach. And I went to USA Rugby and I got my coaching certification, and I had a little binder, and that wasn't enough. And so I would start off with like, what books did you use or are you using now to to help you develop as a coach or develop young athletes? That's where I was looking to start. Does anybody have any off the top of their head or any that they've used in the past? Because I'll go. I just didn't want to steal the good one.
I will say, I have used Rugby Games and Drills. Have you used that?
The
book by I'm looking it up. So it's Simon Warsnop. But I was given it as a gift my first year of assistant coaching at Boston University. The head coach gave it to me at the end of the season, and I still use it because it has like small games. So you can split kids up into like small-sided games. And I really liked that. We did a lot of work designing just like games to get kids moving and passing, and I really liked
Oh my goodness. That's so. I wish we're still kind of in the jaws of COVID. I almost wish that I knew about this book so I could look for it and see what are the types of things I could pull out of there for ideas for activities to use during practices. So that's definitely not a book as I was expecting to hear. But I'm going to put it in the show notes, and then I think I'm probably going to ask questions on Discord of you of some of the ones that you've tried and have worked best. So you've got questions coming in your direction. So
Okay,
so
sure.
so what was the name of that book again?
Called Rugby Games and Drills.
Okay, yeah, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So Katie, is that a specific age group aligned, or is it just generally anybody who plays rugby? I mean, would it work for like third, fourth graders all the way through to high schoolers and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it works for anyone. I think for me, like some of those games seem very youth oriented to me. But that's perfect when I think about who I'm, like I used them when I was coaching college players. Like anytime you're teaching someone new skills, you're going with rudimentary, I mean, like basic games, things that get them moving and looking for space,
Mhm.
And so I think it's applicable to any new player. And then what I liked about that that because they start with a basic framework, sometimes they have building blocks, but sometimes there are games that like I play now that are essentially built off of frameworks they set up, if that makes sense. The book.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I think it's good for youth and good for essentially anyone learning the game. And there are a lot of them. I mean, most often I think I use them for passing kinds of drills as opposed to contact, essentially. So there's a lot of non-contact work in there.
Yeah, as Daniel says, it's a shame we're finding out after we just wrapped up our first COVID series of training, because we
Sorry.
created some interesting stuff, but
Yes.
we might have learned from experience rather than trailblazing.
Putting the wheel back. Although I will say that the way you guys created rugby foosball was literally mind-boggling. It just blew my mind that you guys created that. But Kate, yeah, I'm suddenly very very interested in that book, and I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna get it for myself, and I'll be asking you all kinds of questions. So that's a great book.
Sure.
So so Chris, you know what? I think I'm gonna bite because I think I like where you're going with this in the question that you were asking. So one of the first books that I first started using, if we're going to be focusing on books first, was the Think Rugby and the Total Rugby. That was done by Jim Greenwood, I think. And I think at that point, so I started coaching. Sorry, ST 92, 93. So like 94, 94, 95 is when I started coaching. And I agree with you. I took the clinic from USA Rugby. We had George Hook and Eddie O'Sullivan. I'll talk about that later when we talk about those types of things. Um, and got my little binder, and I wanted more because I think I started realizing that I didn't know a lot. I think I was starting to become aware of how little I really knew, and I went to those books because those were like the seminal books of learning the sports science of rugby, and they were great. They were very useful. There were also rugby has, I think, in many ways has left a lot of those books behind. The sport itself has changed a lot of the things that those books um, discussed and really sort of showed you how to understand the sport. I think a lot of those things don't exist anymore in the sport. The sport itself has moved forward, but I think and I remember hearing that those books were amazing. That there were a new way of thinking of coaching rugby and seeing rugby. So I went with those books. Did anybody else? And Chris, is that where you were going? Were you setting the tee for that one?
Yeah, I sure was. I sure was. And but there's a lot of reasons why. Like Total Rugby in particular, it did leave quite an impression on me, and it has been updated, right? You're not going to find crouch, touch, pause, engage anymore. Updated it, and they've updated it to reflect more current information. But although it was originally published a long time ago, so it has some old school thought. It's not as transcendent as it was when it was first written. But one of the things that it was funny, I first started playing rugby. Somebody handed me that book. My first year, said, you need to read this book if you're going to play rugby. And I gotta be honest with you, it sat on the coffee table for years, right? I was like, yeah, that's great. That's great. I'll read that later. And I never did read it. When I finally read it, when I became a coach and I finally read it, I said, why didn't I read this sooner? There was so much information about strategy that I didn't know as just a dumb American just running around chasing fly halves for my life. And it just told me so much about strategy, about the rugby game. But it's also, the book is a manual, right? The book had nuanced information about the scrum and where your head goes and where your arm goes and how you're creating leverage, which I thought was really helpful. But it also taught you how to be a coach. It talked about how to present yourself as a coach, how to plan for training sessions and that sort of thing. So I thought, like, some of that information doesn't go away. It doesn't matter how old the book is. You still need to, be a coach, and you still got to scrum, even if they change the calls for it. You still got to scrum. So there's a lot of information in there that's still good. And then again, if you want more, I think rugby's more the same, with a lot more, obviously, thinking and strategy than maybe some of the tactical stuff. But again, these things are manuals, and I think they're still applicable. Maybe not as cherished as they were 20 years ago, but they're still a good source of information if you're looking for a manual on rugby.
Chris, you just made me feel so guilty about the fact that I have that book and it's sitting on my bookshelf and I haven't read it yet.
I think I needed it more than other people. In hindsight, well, I sure was limited in the scope of what I understood about what I was doing. I was literally chasing the fly half for the first 8 years of rugby as a flanker. So one other note about that, by the way, and interestingly enough, so I got that book again not too long ago. I give it to my kid, and it's on the bookshelf. Right? You're not reading that book, right?
I think I did read it.
Maybe it's like a manual, right? But like, much prefers some of the other books, right? There's a whole other, like, direction after you go to those, but of these autobiographies, there's tons and tons of autobiographies, and I wouldn't say you go there to learn how to coach, but your players can read them, and you can read them, and they're relatively entertaining. And it's interesting to see how these international rugby players grew up. What did they do to be successful? What games did they play? How did they behave themselves? And how did they get to where they were? And then what struggles they faced along the way. So as much as I wouldn't recommend maybe a particular autobiography for anyone to say, and here's how to coach, if you're into a read that's not a manual, that actually is, has some entertainment value, then the autobiographies that are out there are really amazing. Those are books that you read, Skylar, quite frequently.
I'll be honest.
Oh.
I didn't know. I guess I didn't know they existed. I didn't know they were a thing. And I think I do like nonfiction. I love fiction, but I've started reading some nonfiction, some really interesting stories of individuals, and that was nowhere near my radar. And now that I've heard you mention that a few times, I'm actually starting to get kind of curious about that, and I think I'm gonna, next time I get a chance to pick up a new book or get at something that something that I feel I haven't done before. I think that's the first thing I'm gonna reach for. Look for an autobiography for some of these figures in rugby. So I'm glad that I heard about that.
Yeah, good. Skylar, you have a recommendation for Daniel? What should be his first one?
I mean, I've got a few that I really liked. I think Sam Warburton's book was my favorite of them all. But I don't know that one. Richie McCaw's was good.
What are they called? So everybody knows what they're called. What's Richie McCaw's book called?
The Real Macaw.
The Real Macaw, right? Yeah. And what's Sam Warburton?
Sam Warburton's Dan Carter's is kind of just Dan Carter, and I don't know if I ever finished that one, but that was a good one. And
Yeah,
then
I think.
Kieran Reed's got one that I haven't finished.
Oh, okay.
World
Well,
Best Channel.
we want
Yeah,
to know which
no,
ones you're
no. I want
recommending.
to hear. Yeah, I want to
which
hear the ones that you did
which
finish.
ones-
So it's the real. You
Yeah.
know what? I'm going to remember the real McCall. So I'm just going to go with the real McCall.
Yeah, I think that would be a good one. And there are plenty of them out there, right? I think probably most famous is Johnny Wilkinson's book, is probably the most sold. And if we're talking about coaching, Clive Woodward has a book too, and he coached the England World Cup championship team in 2003.
I think Joe Schmidt has a book too.
Yeah.
Former Ireland coach.
Yeah, right. But so Clive Woodward is a book I do have, and I have read, and that one's a really good one for coaches. I think that's a good place to start. And I think like I said, if you want to talk about like volume sold as an indicator of how good a book is, that one's towards the top of the list. And that actually gets me to another sort of genre. As a coach, we're not just coaching rugby. It's not. We're coaching, or as a parent, we're raising youth to be successful, and it doesn't have to be a rugby book, right? So there are other coaching books out there that are outside of rugby. When I was coaching soccer, I was reading soccer books, and when I was coaching youth basketball, I was reading basketball books, and I found a lot of those books also left an impression. But most notably is anything by John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach. Do y'all know who he is? He just won national championship after national champion for years, but he was more than a basketball coach. He was an athlete whisperer, right? And it was the whole package. He wasn't just talking about coaching. He was talking about life and overall happiness and success and what to do. And so John Wooden's books and On Leadership of note, but the other books he also has are really big winners in my in my estimation of books that you want to read about to be the best coach you can be. Really insightful. And even if you can find Cliff Note versions, even check the internet for some from sort of Cliff Note versions, I think you'd find it useful as well.
I think that's an interesting comment. I mean, one of the it's no great insight from my behalf, but one of the general observations about rugby is that teams win matches and elite individuals don't. And so, the concept of coaching a rugby team by teaching them great values of how to work together, respectful for each other, respectful for their opposition, respectful for the laws, and really just pull on that team strength. It's one game that absolutely rewards that, probably more than any other game I've experienced, at least.
Yeah, well said.
Also, I'm going to piggyback on that idea and say one of the most powerful books that I've read in the past 3 years was recommended to me by another coach, called The Culture Code, which is actually kind of about businesses, I think. Like in its core, it's kind of about creating groups that are highly successful. But it was such a really helpful book to read in being very thoughtful about designing a culture and really making people feel ownership in that culture and how powerful that can be towards, like manifesting behaviors on an everyday basis that people feel empowered with. I really loved it. So it's like, actually, I gave it to all of my assistant coaches that year. So
It is a
Totally.
hardcore business book as well. Yeah. So good insight.
yeah.
Well, I've been struggling with this from a different perspective because I spent a career leading teams of young men and women. The thing that I find that I falter with, because I coach as well as run the league, is the education part. And so I'm finding that some of the best coaches aren't necessarily the best rugby minds at our level. It's the teachers who understand how to teach a new skill and a new sequence of skills, how to introduce them, and how to take a kid that knows nothing about the sport and what they're supposed to be doing and find the right building blocks of instruction to get them to be functional rugby players and understand how the things all come together again. come together at the higher level. So if anybody could recommend any books on how to teach rugby to youth, I think that's one of the things we struggle with so much, because it's many times it's not so much that we have to teach them a new sport. We also have to unteach them the old sport that they've been playing most of their lives. And
That's a
so
really good.
I tell
Yeah.
when parents, they want to tell me they think it's football without pads, and I try to tell them that think about it as football without the whistle, and you'll understand a little bit more about it. And when I started thinking about it in that perspective, when I would tell football players about the sport, the light came on quicker. But still, how do you take a kid who thinks he or she knows what they're doing and get them on the field and teach them a sequence of things to be a functional rugby player? It's hard. And what's funny is that if we're playing basketball, you show up to basketball practice, kids are shooting hoops, waiting for practice to start, or they're throwing the baseball around and taking practice swings or whatever before baseball. At rugby, they sit there looking at each other, waiting for practice to start and for them to begin to be led. And so, how do you give them the skills? So one of the things that always struck me is when, I played with a bunch of Commonwealth guys, we'd show up to practice and they'd start running touch until
Yep.
everybody got there. And it's something
But
that we don't do here in the States. And I'm just wondering if there are any good books on how to build that kind of self-awareness of the game in the student, in the young student athletes, so that they understand what it is you're supposed to do, and they can do it on their own and build their own innovation and their own creativity, which we have in all these other sports that's so hard to get in rugby because they spend most of their time wondering if they're doing it right.
So it's funny, Jeff. We because we're 7 years into our club. So when we started back in the early days, we had all the coaches were ex-rugby players, and we didn't have enough kids to put together 5 kids on a team. So we would just start playing touch. And as time went by, every time new kids arrived, we were playing touch, and they just jumped in and started playing. And you'd quietly mention, hey, okay, try to be behind the ball, not in front of the ball. Try to pass the ball backwards. And so we've seen that grow. And I have to be honest, it was interesting hearing you describe it, because this is not something I think anyone in the Barbarians thinks about anymore, ignoring the COVID era. Because we, at all our practices, the first thing we do is the kids get out there, they come out, pick up the ball, start slinging it around a bit, and then we'll say, guys, okay, it's enough, let's start playing touch. And everyone just piles in and starts playing touch. And only then do we start doing warm-up, stretching, breaking into the teams. But I think what you've described is a legitimate challenge. All those kids who start shooting hoops, were brought up watching basketball on TV,
Right.
and they were brought up, knocking a ball into the back of when they were playing baseball and all these other things, and so that exposure to rugby on television is probably the biggest challenge, I think, for that brand new club starting from scratch. No one has the exposure to rugby on TV. And I hear that from parents, actually, bizarrely. Parents saying, oh my God, this looks so fantastic. I really wished I'd heard about this when I was a kid. And now they're like in their late 40s, early 50s, and they really don't need to be knocked over by young children. But yeah, I think that's the challenge. It's just start. Just do it. And I think there's no book to describe how to just do it.
Well, part of that is, are there some good instruction books that take a new, preteen or a teenager and say, okay, here's the steps that you need to, here's how you instruct these people, because we're not naturally teachers, most of us. We're good directors and good organizers, but there is a way, the pedagogy, the science of getting information into young, impressionable brains. Teachers know about that, and it would be great if there were a teacher focused in the instruction, if somebody could write that kind of book.
So Jeff, I think what you're talking about is it is out there, but it's not in a book, or I haven't found it in a book. And I think what the title of the book, if you were looking for it, is how to teach rugby to a new club or a new player from square one to understanding the sport. And I don't think that's there just yet. I think there are clinics or there's resources that I have gone to that I felt have done a pretty good job about teaching me how to be a better teacher of
Mhm.
rugby. But there's no book that I have found, and there's no one place. So I think if somebody knows of the one place, that would be fantastic. But it has been my experience to date that there is no one place that I've ever gone to that have given me, obviously not like the full spectrum, because that would be too much to ask for, but even not the A to Z, but the A to B or the A to C, even like a small spectrum. I have yet to find a good place that I can turn to be able to walk in as as a coach. I'm a new coach, and maybe as I played for a little while, and now I want to be a coach. And okay, who do I go to be a new coach so that I can now teach my team that is a totally new team? And that was kind of the sort of the place that a lot of people find that some people find themselves into. I played in high school, then I went to college. My college team had no coach. We had 8 or 9 kids, 12, 17, depending on the day of the week for practice. And for some of that time, it fell on my shoulders to be the coach and teach them how to play rugby. Not something I wanted to do. I did not want to do that, but I found myself, since I knew rugby from high school, I was the one that was kind of leading some of the practices. Um, and I tell you, there's no place that I've gone to that has said, "Hey, you're new to rugby or you're new to wanting to coach rugby. Let me give you everything you need so you feel comfortable and be at least have a basic level of understanding." The coaching clinics that gave me the certifications started that. And
Yep.
Chris, I think you mentioned that you took those back in the day. Were you in the era with George Hook and Eddie O'Sullivan?
Oh, I wish. No, I was not.
Those were pretty good. If not, they were incredibly entertaining. I mean, those were just two, polar opposite personalities, but they were just huge personalities. And I will say they did a very good job. They did a great job at least making me feel that I was ready to start. And I think I said it earlier. They let me know that there was a whole lot that I didn't know, as opposed to jumping in there and be like, okay, I'm the new coach. Let's run some drills. You know,
And the other thing is we're also talking about youth, and their bodies aren't developed yet, and their brains aren't developed yet, and so that's all the more reason to have somebody with a teacher's perspective to help drive this, because I think it really matters. We have some Hendricken alumni who were teaching at the school now, who played on the team 10 years ago, and now they're teaching there, and they are some of our best coaches, not because they're great um, rugby minds, but they understand how the kids learn, and they get much more production out of the drills and out of the instruction than some of us who don't understand that. And it's the kind of thing that I wish we had for youth rugby. Maybe some of the teachers who play rugby could write that book. It may be the kind of thing that we need, particularly as for Rhode Island's case, where we're really we're really a startup.
hey Kate, you gonna write that book?
Funny, Alan put that in the thing. I have constantly said, first of all, that like I'm so glad that I coached college before high school, and that having coached high school, I'm now very interested, and I've gone to like assist in some youth rugby places, because I think, unlike maybe other sports, people don't. If you didn't play youth rugby, which many Americans did not,
Right.
you don't have a concept of how to teach this sport to a child or what an appropriate goal is, right? So I'm sure that's not true of anyone on the call, because you guys are all the experts and I'm not at all. But it's interesting to me to sometimes watch adults in any sport like make like that create a goal of like almost the whole sport in one. Like they want a kid to conceptualize the whole sport in one, and it's like, oh, a little kid. I mean, not a little kid, but like a kid. Like you got to create a really manageable goal set and really celebrate getting close to that, and have really easy entry level language. Like, you're serving a pizza slice. That's part of your pass, like it's not, like we're so used to maybe trying to pick up more technical terms. And you're right that the thing about educators is that perhaps they're really good at creating language that connects what kids are currently aware of, what you're trying to get them to do.
So you think my methodology of starting with a law book and going through it page by page is not really the best strategy? Is that what
I
you're
don't
saying?
know, Alan. You told me that those barbarians were crushing it last season. So maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong.
That was not on a podcast. That was just idle bragging. There was no such thing.
And it compounds it that most of us who started rugby later in life were pretty much just thrown out there and said, "Hey, we'll tell you how it goes as it goes." I think I
Yeah,
had 20
exactly.
minutes of instruction.
So,
I guess, I mean, as a non-educator and a person who kind of was never really, I mean, I did start playing rugby at 7 or 8 years old, but I'd been watching it on TV, and so many of the stuff that you're describing, Jeff, actually was not something I had because I already had some reasonably intrinsic understanding.
Mhm.
But coming over here, probably the having floundered around incompetently for a period of time, I guess my one major walkaway from all of this was when the kids are laughing, they're learning, and when they're not laughing, they're not learning. And if you can make them happy and they can have fun doing things, then they seem to get their heads around it. The other overarching message I always saw from the kids is that no matter how we wanted to pitch it, it's all about playing. It's not about winning. Deep down inside, it's about winning. And the best thing we can do is help them to understand that it's about winning appropriately. It's about being generous in victory and brave in loss, and just playing fairly, playing well, playing to the best of your ability, and being part of your team. But the number one thing was happy. If they're happy, if they're laughing, they're generally having a good time. And whilst we're blowing people's trumpets, it's the one thing I think that makes Daniel just stand out in our club. I mean, his kids laugh more than any of the other kids in the whole place. And I don't know whether that's just Daniel or he's just very lucky. I've got great kids, but that to me seems to be a key part of it.
And I think we're also, this isn't so much about coaching technique, but it's about the resources. But we're just, I think, touching on one of the big challenges we have here in the U.S. is the lack of rugby culture. Because when kids start playing football or they start playing basketball, they think they're Tom Brady, or they think they're Gronk, or they think they're whoever, because that's ingrained, and they try to emulate the things that they see on TV. I like,
Right.
I hate it when I see a kid on the sidelines not paying attention to the match, because there's so few chances to see actual
Yep.
rugby being played. And I only have to ask the question, and they know the answer to it now. I ask them, what are the ways that you learn how to play rugby? By playing rugby and by watching rugby. So
Yep.
please watch the game, watch it on TV. But we just don't have that culture.
Well, to that point, and bringing it back to resources, and you're right. You've identified a huge opportunity, a big black hole, and that is how do you, especially for youth rugby, because if we were talking about resources, and actually I will point out, we're supposed to be talking about resources, and we are a youth rugby focused podcast, and we spent some good time talking about books for adults about adult rugby. Right now, technically, they were great books about showing you the richness and the spectrum of coaching, and with that, how to be a good coach. But you're right, we haven't said very much. We haven't mentioned a lot of things that are great resources to point somebody to when they need information about coaching youth rugby. Which
Daniel?
yes.
I just wanted to point out two things then in terms of resources.
Yeah.
And one of them is Miro and USA Rugby adapted essentially like a program that could be rolled out in PE classes, and they gave trainings to physical education teachers, perhaps throughout Boston public schools, that were designed to help PE teachers introduce rugby in small-sided games. And so that whole training exists somewhere within Myro. And I know Daryl used to go around and give them, but even that resource exists pre-Daryl.
So Kate, can I
that
interrupt your interruption on Daniel and say that there's a new program that hasn't been pushed very far and hasn't been announced. So so I guess I'm failing in my confidentiality agreement process. But USA Rugby and NLR have got an agreement together to go and try and help introduce flag rugby to elementary schools, and so that they've asked all the SGBs who have a local MLR team, Jeff, that includes you, to start, kind of working out how can you work together, how can we make this work? Because what we've seen be very, very interesting is when we go. When Myra's gone to introduce rugby to many kids, particularly in certain areas of the state, etc., what we found to be challenging is that after they've done the introduction, how do we follow up? How do we get them into clubs? Do we have a local club who can catch them? Do we need to form a club to catch them? And all these things become quite challenging. And so by combining, for us obviously around here, Free Jacks with Myro, and obviously the same again for the Fighting Cohogs down in Rhode Island. There's no reason for us not to work with them and say, okay, we have a club in this area. Here are half a dozen schools that could potentially be impacted positively by this training and start to build from there. So I think in that respect, we're starting to see some good ideas come out and build on those concepts you mentioned. So let me apologize for interrupting you. But...
Oh, I think that's great. It's awesome, actually. And I think it's really key to the one piece of that is training the adults, back to Jeff's point, training adults to keep up that system, right? So it's not enough to just introduce kids. It's also providing a framework so that adults can roll it out themselves, And I think Rugby also used to have that for youth.
It was a rugby in a box, rugby in a bag concepts of a few years ago.
Yep. And sort of sort of riffing off of that, and also tying into what Jeff was saying earlier, and tying into a resource. So there's something now, YouTube, that I didn't have when I first started coaching, even playing rugby. I think I've played probably a number of games of rugby before seeing any rugby. The only rugby I saw was through my eyes while I was running, and to Chris's point, I was chasing the fly half. Now YouTube as a resource, and I would like to be able to use it more, and I haven't been. Jeff, you were talking about how some of these kids have never seen it, and it's difficult to be able to get them that rugby sense. I wonder how many coaches out there have sent a website URLs to good matches or relevant information in YouTube. How many leverage YouTube directly into the eyeballs of the parents and the children? I know that I haven't. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so Phil Humphrey is actually pretty good about that.
Mm-hmm.
He'll find one topic online someplace, and he's got a Facebook page for the rugby team at Hendricken. And we practice Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, and on the off days to preview something that he's going to teach the next day. For example, basic tackling. He will have a short video that he found online from a youth coach in New Zealand who's put it on YouTube, and he'll put that on the Facebook site and push it out and say, everybody should view this before we practice because we'll go over this tomorrow in practice. And it's been very helpful to get the language right, for them to see the picture, to see, like an observer, it's really hard when you're standing around the pitch and you're trying to get the right view and see what's going on. It's nice when it's in a video, you can stop and you can watch it more than once. The downside of YouTube, and we tell this to parents all the time, please don't just go to YouTube and say, show me some rugby because you get, the greatest heavy hits that you've ever seen, and it looks like a real rough game. And some parents, can leave aghast. So we have to be careful about how we expose the kids to some of the things on YouTube, but it can be a really great resource.
On that
Go
topic,
ahead. Go ahead.
NBC has changed the way they're delivering rugby. They used to have their Sports Gold package, and that was, I don't know, $60-$70 a year. Come November, that's all rolling into their Peacock streaming premium package. So that has a lot more stuff than rugby in it, but that carries tons of European rugby, and it kind of it goes back to making it more available to people, more readily available in a form factor that makes sense to them or they're used to using. So it was just another source of streaming or video, working on a principle that I'm not sure my kids can read half the time. My children, that is, not the kids I coach, because the books lie dusty on the shelf, and they deal with other things to get their information nowadays.
Now, the one thing that I like to make a distinction when thinking about resources, recommending resources, and especially YouTube. And Jeff, I totally get your it's a Pandora's box. Your apprehension about sending people to YouTube and look in YouTube. Also, my apprehension to send coaches or people that need resources. And YouTube goes without saying now. I mean, if you want to learn how to bake or play an instrument or whatever, you just go to YouTube first and see how other people have messed it up before you try it. Um, Another warning that I like to put out there to be cognizant of is um, if I'm trying to figure out what to do next week for a new game, for young players where they have to stay away from one another. Yep, I will mine YouTube. It's one of the easiest things to go look through, and it also gives me ideas. But I think that it's sending somebody to YouTube and some resources maybe gives you good ideas about how to do something that moment or a drill or a very specific thing, but that doesn't. The one thing that it lacks, so it's easy, it's fast to get at, but the one thing that it's going to lack is give you kind of what we were talking about earlier, is a better general picture about how you want to set up your practices or your program at the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, towards the end of the season, how you want to break things up between individuals, subunits, units, and then like the whole team, the whole part, that type of thing. It's going to be great at giving you ideas and giving you like a quick hit at a small answer you're looking for, but perhaps it's not going to give you a better vision about what it means or what are some of the key things you want to keep in mind, the basic pillars for coaching a program without then having to read 500 hours or more of consuming other resources like books, to really get a PhD in how to be a coach. So that's the way I break things up in that way. Is this the type of stuff that's helping me sort of like tactically come up with information that I need now or tomorrow, or is this a good resource that's more strategic, that's teaching me more about how to be a coach? And I'd love to have a really good balance, kind of the way USA Rugby and their coaching programs did, where they give you a binder, and it's a fairly holistic understanding about whether you're coaching rugby or other sports. This is kind of what you want to be able to keep in mind to coach. And then, hey, by the way, you're coaching rugby, so you also want to remember these other things. So those are the two things. And YouTube, I love it for that quick hit um, understanding of the small things that I may need. But a bigger, broader view about how to make those little pieces really more effective throughout, from week to week, or for the individual group that I'm working with, those are hard to find. That's not a YouTube type of thing. That's more of a coaching clinic that I got through USA Rugby, or that some of these other entities out there are putting out there. These coaching clinics on how to coach the coach. Has anybody been or taken part in some of these coaching clinics, or something that sort of gives you the next step? Because
Yeah, I've been part of some of those, Daniel. There was one up in that was held up in Boston a while ago. And it was a good insight on how to connect, really connect towards the kids. It was the one I went to was really focused on sort of the rugby in a bag, in developing the PE class situation, and it was great. But along with that, I've been racking my brain thinking about resources here, and you know, uh, that clinic was awesome, and I gotta say, even though there's plenty of things out there. We have YouTube and everything. All my best ideas and all my long lasting strategies for building the club and maintaining the club just been from watching what's out there. You go to the clinics, like live rugby in person. It's still, you know, that's still the best way that I can see anything, because you inject yourself into the situation. It's not just you're not a third person in it. And um yeah, I mean, unfortunately, from my perspective, is experience. And the good news is, you know rugby's growing. It's all out there, and all most practices are open. There are plenty of clinics. The free jacks are happening. Just live rugby, and that's the best resource I found for sure.
Maybe one of the things we might do is find a way to maintain a website of useful videos for coaches to use, particularly for programs that are just starting up and new coaches, to just the very 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 basic things. And I know USA Rugby has some of those instructional videos, um, uh, but there are a whole bunch more out there, and maybe if we had a central repository of good videos that people think might be helpful, and we could direct people there so they could find what they need to help coach. I'll say one last thing about watching rugby as a resource. We had great success, because I was remembering back to when I was recruited to play rugby, because I'm 6'4". I was 280 in as a freshman in college. So I got grabbed by the collar and brought to a.
Yes.
They had a. In that case, it was a keg of beer, but they had the All Blacks playing the Barbarians, and we watched a rugby match. And the guys were talking about what was going on, and that got me excited to play. And so we started doing that without the keg of beer at Hendricken. We have pizza night on the last night of finals, um, and we have a match on TV, and free pizza, and that's how we recruit our players to watch a match, have the pizza, and the best recruiters are the players themselves talking to their classmates, talking about what a cool game it is and what's going on and what they're doing. And the coaches aren't involved in that. It's nice to see the seasoned players getting excited about watching a game, and all the kids watching it together like they'd be watching a football game or a basketball game on TV.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sort of tying into what you're saying about your peer group being, a big influence or a significant part at all, and sort of calling back to what Shaggy said. Yeah, I will say that some of the biggest resources that have made the biggest impact and that I continue to turn to are you guys, are the different coaches that I've had the pleasure of and privilege. I've been lucky enough to shadow or work with, either as a assistant coach or as a lackey. Those are the things that have really ramped up my understanding of rugby and how I can affect a rugby in folks, the fastest, the most meaningful, but in the most meaningful way. um, and so I definitely encourage, if you're out there and you're looking for, you were hoping to listen to this and find out this great new website or this awesome new book or this TV show. um, I think if there's a silver, perhaps not a golden BB silver bullet, it's not going to fix everything. But I think the thing that has been literally most impactful to me was, by hook or by crook, get myself into a situation where I'm hanging out chatting with, talking, listening to, or participating with other coaches, whether it's going to a selections camp. Hey, you need help at a selections camp? Yeah, sure, I'll go help. Now you're seeing the structure between, a head coach that has an entire staff because they have got one day or maybe one weekend to get entire selections done. Just go to those things, plug yourself in, and watch other coaches do what it is that they do, or just go to other practices. I have learned so much from doing that. Shaggy, was that sort of along the lines of what you were saying?
Yeah, Daniel. I mean, rugby's in my mind is very different than a lot of other sports. It's always going to be a participant sport in my mind. I mean, it's great to watch, but first and foremost, uh, ease of accessibility of the sport is kind of what elevates it in my mind. And since things are out there, just getting and putting yourself as close to the first person perspective to what you want to learn is seems most effective to me in this particular case. And yeah, and it's a welcoming community, and everyone wants to grow. So there's no secrets here.
And the other thing that I'd like to say as far as resources is right now, because of what we're facing and people frustrated and not being able to get out and looking for things to do, and being rugby oriented, it almost feels like we're like in the golden age of resources for rugby. Um, there are more podcasts that seem to have popped up, more podcasts, and not so many resources about youth rugby, but there is so many podcasts out right now. They're on Facebook. They've got their own web pages. There is just so much to consume right now. I mean, we got this crazy idea to start the show at the beginning of the year. I think we got 3 podcasts in, 3 episodes in. Then COVID hit, and we did a whole bunch week after week after week after week, and it seems like everybody else got that idea. It's incredible to see how approachable figures that you probably would never have access to are, and how not just approachable, but they're putting themselves out there because there's just nothing else to do. So if you're looking for stuff, look for the podcasts. Go to YouTube. They have a bunch of other people have gotten themselves into streaming casts also. If it's digital, it seems like right now you have more access to more things than ever before. I wish there was more of these clinics that we were talking about earlier. I mean, I wish all the clinics were like through USA Rugby, and I could just leverage my certifications and then learn more about specific things. But it looks like no, it's like I have to go dig and find out who's. But Northeast Academy has done some great ones on sevens. Right now, the Free Jacks are putting themselves out there. They've done some digitally, and right now, I am very excited to go and see these regional ones for the regional teams. I got my shirt, the Mutineers, so go Mutineers. I'm excited to see that one happen. I think it's in a week or two. So Jeff, I'll be down in Newport, in your neck of the woods. To
Sunday
see.
afternoon.
Yep, to see what that's like. Bring my kids, but really, I'm going there with my note and pad to take lots and lots of notes. All right, so that's what I have there. Anybody else? Anybody have any other resources that I haven't had a chance to bring up yet?
I do
We
have
haven't.
one. I don't know if it's. I will say I use it all the time, and that is it's a subscription site is the one thing. And that is the rugby site, which I'm sure some people have used before, but it's essentially it provides like a look at some drills, but it also has progressions of drills if you're trying to build in attack or catch pass, tackling, breakdown, set piece, defense. And so one thing that I really like is that it can help me plan like a series of weeks and say like, okay, I'm going to do this set of drills this week. And then next week, I'm going to start for 5 minutes with the drill we did on the catch pass, and then I'm gonna, build this piece in. So I've really enjoyed that, and I shouldn't be saying this on a YouTube live stream here, but like I've then given my password out to other coaches in my system, and so it's like somebody can be like, "Hey, does this work for the 20 minutes that we have to do this?" And it's like, "Yeah, that does. That's great." So I've really enjoyed using the rugby site.
Oh, okay. So it's a collection of videos that
Yeah,
build on specific skills.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's
And it's like
interesting.
because you have to pay for it. So I think it's something like $75 a year. So I do a one-time yearly subscription, but they also have like I am trying to not use the phrase name brand coaches, but that's what I'm looking for. Some great coaches that are like on there breaking different things down. So international coaches are like doing a 3-part series where they maybe talk about the attack or the defensive wall, or you know what I mean, and they're showing people walking through it. So it's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
Cool. Yeah, I'm showing that right now on the stream. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll second that. And by the way, they do have some content available that's not subscription, and I remember it being relative, for what it is, what you described, Kate. I remember it being relatively cheap. I mean, maybe a little cheaper than you said, but you're probably right. But I just remembered it being like, oh wow, you're getting content from international coaches, international legends, players that are legends, and all for the price of a cup of coffee. This sound like a late night commercial, but so I agree with you.
They do actually offer a free trial, Kate, so keep your password safe.
Okay.
And by the way, there are other sites that probably I wouldn't say are as good as the rugby site. There are others that are available. I think we should talk about that next week or in the next couple of weeks. That's my idea, because the list is quite long. There's a lot of online content available now, and we were just scratching the surface here today. But that's what I hope we can talk about next time.
I think that's actually a really good point, Chris, because there is tons of good information. I often find myself looking up one very specific thing, how exactly do I want to break people in to get them to do X, Y, Z, and just search on that. And there's always a myriad of some not so good, some very good stuff without actually necessarily hitting any of the high quality, premium sites. But yeah, online there's fabulous resources there. But you do need to know how to ask the right question if you're not using one of these paid for resources. Like, for example, I came across, and I'm missing it now, Ruck Science, and I was looking for off-season exercises, just to kind of work on fitness. It was more aimed for myself than it was really for the for the clubs. But it had a bunch of exercises that really suited the stuff I cared about, and but it talks a lot about why pounding around running isn't necessarily the right way to get yourself fit in the off season, and focusing on things like rowing machine. In my case, it was focused on a rowing machine to build up the fitness and the strength on the grounds that it didn't stress your joints out, it didn't make you do unnecessary things and stuff like that. And so as a complete, almost orthogonal way of thinking about it, that had a particularly different, interesting look at life. And so again, I think the amount of resources are just fantastic out there, compared to the pre-internet world. In fact, that's probably why rugby couldn't go professional until 1996, because we didn't have all the resources available to us.
Right.
Could very well be one note that, yeah, that's, I mean, hopefully that can bridge the gap for the U.S. too. I think Jeff said it really well earlier. I wasn't able to chime in during that time, but the U.S. has a unique challenge where we have to sort of train crossover athletes that are a little bit older. We do have the online content, or you mentioned NBC Sports, and there's other resources available for kids. But like we there's still room for us to grow, and I think you had a great idea there earlier, Jeff. on that note. Actually, while just I'm off mute there, I just want to circle back to a couple books that I think are worth mentioning that you sort of teased out of me. And one is one when you mentioned the culture code. Kate, that reminded me that same author, Coyle, he wrote the Talent Code, which is a really big book too. It's a similar idea, but it's not as much about organizations as it is about the individual. But about organization, there's a book called Legacy, which talks about the All Blacks reconstruction in 2003, into the mid 2000s, and about how they built themselves back up, on the back of their legacy, the All Black legacy. And there's a lot of really positive messages in there for all organizations, including business organizations as well as our rugby clubs. I have to mention that one. And I just also want to mention there is a book series for kids out there, for middle schoolers or kids, or otherwise kids who really might want to read about rugby and have a good time. The series is the first book is called The Rugby Spirit, and it's a really good book for kids. It seems like it's pretty fun, and I think a lot of kids who really get into rugby, they don't have a lot of places to go for it, and that's one place they can go to get a sort of a rugby fix and have some fun. They're not going to learn how to play rugby from that book, but since we were talking about books earlier, I thought we were mentioning it. Okay, well, good. You learn.
The main character was a GAA player.
Right.
His roommate has to explain rugby to him.
Right. Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, get rugby explained. There's plenty of rugby in it. I think just kind of wanted to close off on books because there was a couple left unmentioned, and I wanted to make sure anyone listening and we all each other, if you had a kid come up to you and said, like, I really love rugby, are there any books that I can read? And you don't want to send them to, especially if they're middle schooler, you don't want to send them to Think Rugby. You might want to send them to the winning Rugby Spirit direction.
I guess I'm building on that. I mean, obviously there's the the all-time rugby classic Invictus, and then I'm completely blanking on the name, but it's about a US rugby team called the Highlanders, and the coaching ethos there. Does anyone remember the name of that movie?
Do you know it, Skylar?
Forever Strong.
That'll be the one. Very good. The guy. I mean, this everything you said, Jeff, about being a teacher, reaching to kids, the coach of that organization and how they portray him, he is that guy. And at least on the DVD that I watched, that it was on, the extras actually had an interview with the real coach. It was mind blowing. His worldview was I'd never heard anything like it. It was incredible. And so for me, that was quite quite an experience watching that movie, and it's just a film. It's not like a Hollywood blockbuster, but it's a great film. And for anybody who's marginally interested in rugby and about how rugby steers you right and how rugby gives you better values, that film really carries that message across.
Fantastic. So that brings us to circling back to books, finishing up some of the ones we may have missed. YouTube, again, a great site, great resources, individual sites, some professional for pay. Obviously, you're gonna get some pretty fresh stuff out of there. That's really useful. I'm actually really interested. I've never really paid for some of these, but I think I'm going to go ahead and look at some of those and maybe get myself a subscription. I'm very curious, and then I'm always on the lookout for clinics. That's kind of the way that I learn. Um, and then most important for me, you're always going to see me weaseling my way into another practice, another clinic, asking questions or chatting with coaches about, hey, how do you do X, Y, and Z, or just talking, just talking rugby with other coaches. That just hours just disappear in doing that. That just I find great joy in being able to do that. Do we have any more things that were left unsaid? Maybe that didn't fit in some of the categories we were talking about?
Oh, we could talk forever, Daniel. I wanna, I wanna try to wrap it up. There is a new movie that came out really recently. It's quite similar to Forever Strong. You might be looking for a new one. It's called The Nomads. It's about a rugby team in Philadelphia, inner city. I think it's called The Nomads. It was available on Netflix or Amazon Prime. You might want to check that out. And by the way, All or Nothing All Blacks edition was outstanding as well. But we could go on forever. So I'd say we got to push some of this conversation to another time.
All right. Well, we'll do that. If there's any standouts, bring them up now. If not, we'll go ahead and maybe circle back with another episode with some of the stuff that we didn't even get a chance to scratch. So any
Yeah, I would say Yeah, I would say, Daniel, on that, it's the websites and the YouTube channels, right? There's just a lot of YouTube channels with
Yep.
good content, solid, that are getting refreshed all the time, and there's some website. There's a big one that I really want to talk about. That should be a resource for all coaches. It's called Positive Coach Alliance. I'd like to talk about it for for a more significant amount of time. In the not too distant future, I think we probably owe a whole podcast to websites and YouTube videos.
and I'm sharing that right now. The Positive Coach Alliance. All right. With that said, and with the fact that it's getting a little bit late, any last things, or should we go ahead and wrap it up?
But I have such a good to-do list off of this conversation. So thank you, everyone.
Including writing a book, Kate.
Yeah, yeah, that was a great to-do.
No, I think Jeff modified the comment. You're going to make a series of introductory videos.
It's probably
go
more
with the
useful.
You'll get more likes that way.
Yeah, good point.
You'll get a lot more likes that way. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. We've got plenty of stuff on this topic alone that we can mine more information for. But we've reached the end of our time, so let's go ahead and everybody, if you want to say goodbye, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you again.